broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, we're going to get started here in just a few seconds. Just making sure everything shows up. All right. I believe everybody's here. Oh, geez. 100 plus of you. All right. Let's get started. My name is Don Higgins. I'm the owner of Crew Chief Software, our 33rd or 34th year, whatever it is. This is advanced ET predictions using Crew Chief Software. There's probably some noises you'll hear in the background, with a cat that walks around, and there's a weather station I'm testing in the background as well. If you have any questions, you should see a question area where you can click and type on. And from time to time, we'll stop and go over it. All right, first things first, I'm going to start the program. I'm going to go over a few things on the run entry form, and then we're going to get to databases and a few other areas of the program. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Use these drawing tools. A couple of things that are really important on the Crew Chief screen, especially those of you that are new, is there's a lot of hidden areas in Crew Chief in the upper right here. Upper right here, you can see some fields. This second field down, whatever's in here, will control this. If I double click on that, you'll see that it will change. Different fields are available up here. Just by double clicking on that, you'll see it'll go through a whole bunch of different options there. So you can kind of do whatever you want to do there. Second things that are important, a lot of hidden areas here. This, I'm going to circle on the left-hand side, is the 60-foot label. Call it, not the field, but the label. When you double-click on this, you will see, hold on, let me get ready. It popped up on the screen. There we go. If you double click on the 60-foot area, you'll see your split intervals will show up right here. They weren't showing up before because this track has 594-foot clocks interfere with that. But I just want to show you, you double click on where it says 60 foot. I've got that little arrow there, and you can see your split intervals. I like to see them as I'm typing in the run because I know the split intervals fairly well, and I just want to see them basically. Up to you, that's all optional. But it does help verify that you've got a good run that you're entering. And a lot of times you can find that you mistyped something real quick. Okay, so the most important thing in Crew Chief software is the databases. And we're going to spend a lot of time on databases because they're that important. Where this is the database drop-down list right here where you choose one when you enter a run. Up here in the top, this is the database menu at the very top where to circle it. That's where you'll add or modify databases. And you should have enough databases to do the job, but don't add too many and don't add a whole bunch at once. You want to let the program learn your car. Then when you add a database, you can copy all the factors from a good working existing database, and therefore it won't have to relearn it. Databases control everything. For example, I'm going to use this switch runs right here on the bottom right, and that same thing is on the upper left. These little green arrows on the upper left by run date are also how you switch runs back and forth if you don't want to use the search menu. I'm going to use the previous one. Click 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're to a supercomp database. And so we're not going to cover that. I wanted to show you what happens with the database. So this database is 2021 first timer supercomp. It's a quarter mile database. It has 1,000-foot and quarter-mile information. See that? But when I switch to an eighth-mile database, next, you see all that disappears. Everything that you don't need disappears with the database. So the database is eighth mile, sea level 190 shift, and it's an eighth mile, so it knows to shut off all the fields after the eighth mile. Those of you on the West Coast that get stuck in Vegas and Tucson and Phoenix and places like that where you're at a quarter-mile race, and then they switch to eighth mile in the middle of the event, you need to have a database for when that happens. I get a lot of calls when this happens. So we're going to cover how to make databases, how to do predictions, and some of the other features that are part of it. Our goals today are going to be pretty simple. We're going to show you the new features and how they help with data integrity and precision, determine weather variables and their effects on the lapse time, experiment with factors and formulas for best results, and we're going to explain the different factors for gas, alcohol, E85, 216, whatever fuel you're using. We're going to demonstrate each formula and what it does and why. We're going to use calculate ratios a lot, which is a tab under the predict screen that's very important. It's a teach crew chief software. We're going to set up databases properly and give you reasons for why we do it. We've shown you the switch between runs, but that's really important. The search menu and searching and verifying predictions. This is a very powerful tool. Crew chief software is amazing, but it's a tool. It's still at the mercy of variables it cannot see. You can't see the track prep, your engine temperatures, your trans temperatures, vehicle dynamics. You can't see that. So it's up to you to understand when a prediction may or may not be in your best interest, because you know something about the track that we just simply can't know. So in this particular case, this was the last event I was at. Ended up doing really well. Just had a great event. Predictions were really good. The track was not. When the track was decent, we nailed it. And we're going to show you how we go through this. So the first steps we're going to cover is databases. So I want to bring your attention up to the database menu. I'm going to go over something real quick. These up here are called run, entry, car setup, opponent. Hold on a minute. Why that happened. Sorry about that. These are called tabs. The run entry, car setup, opponent, run completion, predict ET tabs. Above them are the menus. And we're going to the database menu at the very top of the screen that I've circled. What's going on here with it? Hold on just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. I'll be sure to edit all of this. Okay, so we're going to go up to the databases menu at the top of the screen. Right up there, we're going to click on. Those of you who've had crew chief for a while know this. And even though this is an advanced class, I want to make sure people understand the importance of this area. So here's a list of databases. I've got a whole bunch of them because over the years, I've made a lot of changes to my car. So in the old days, I just called them whatever. And this is my database list on the left-hand side. These are all the stored databases, right? Plus a whole bunch more that you can't see with this little arrow down here that you can keep going. On the correct way to do these, though, when you have more than a few, is to call them by the year that were created. At first, I never did that, but towards the end here, I started doing that. There's 2022, there's 2021, all the way down. And that's how we prefer you do this. especially if you're making lots of changes to your car. Create a database with the year in front of the name. It just helps you to find stuff a lot simpler. It's up to you. You can call it whatever you'd like. But I just found out after a while, when you get thousands of runs in it, you'll probably want to do it that. But we have different databases for different things. So, for example, I have a Havana 190 shift that I use at a certain track. I have the 1.9 shift, the 210 shift, and then I've got all-out sea level, things like that. Those are databases that I use a lot of for 8th mile bracket. So when you pick a database or you set up a database, you just got to remember, if you've got a good working one, to make a copy of it, you just double click on the database in the left-hand side. That's what this is right here. It's blinking at you to double click to select the database and then press the enter key. When we do that, we make it a little bit more complicated because we want to make sure you're on the correct database before you make a new one. So I do that, double click and press enter, and then and only then can I use the start new database, because then I know I'm copying from a good working database that was called this, and now I want to make a copy of it for whatever reason. It might just be for a different year, different components, whatever it is. But if the basics haven't changed, the prediction logic and all that goes with it. So it's important that you do that. So now when I click Start New Database, you see two little stars where it will appear in the name. And you can't do anything until you finish this. So you just type in a name. And we'll call it 2022 8th mile. And I'm going to do it for low barometer or Midwest, I'll just say. Okay, and then I'm just going to click on the Save button. I'm not going to put anything else in there. I'm going to go down to this Save button on the bottom, and I'm going to click it. And the reason for that is twofold. One, I want to make sure I save it. And two, I want to make sure I didn't delete a perfectly good working database when I did this. So all my databases are still here that I was using. So now I can go back up to the 2022 one, 8th mile Midwest, and I can finish anything else I need to do. That's the right way to create a new database. It seems weird, but it really works out best, because then you can make sure that you're copying all your prediction logic and formulas over to your new database. And you'll appreciate it because it doesn't have to learn anything. It just, you can start adding runs to it and hit predict, and you know the predictions will be as good as the other database, just a different name. So now in databases, don't forget to go to Setup Info, page 2 at the top here. It's another important area. Okay? And make sure that if you're not a throttle stop, that you don't select throttle stops here or on the Setup Info, page 2. Other things on this database entry area is the date that it was created. Is a little box right here. And then the distance. You've got quarter mile, 8th mile, or 1,000 foot here. I've selected 8th mile. You can put in your target ET or your dial in right there. And your delay box, if you have one, goes in there. If you don't want a delay box, make sure you uncheck Show Delay Box when entering runs. And then it won't show you a delay box to it. You erase the drawings. Now, Setup Info, page 2 in the orange up here has the throttle stop information if you're using one on the upper left. And it has the fuel system right here, the type of vehicle for wind factors, purposely wrong. I'm going to go with Don Higgins. It should have one for 8th mile. So dragster, no wing. Or I can just click Add Vehicle right up here. This little checkbox here, and add your own vehicle to it. So if I do that, I'll just select that, and I'll say 8th mile dragster. And that way it'll have one for 8th mile, because my wind factors for 8th mile are going to be different than they are for quarter mile. And then over here, you probably won't use any of these. These are basically nostalgia stuff. And then the logbook decision, and then down here we have an HP calculation index, and that's used to calculate your horsepower. It will automatically fill in what it thinks would be the right area, or right number. So in this particular case, you can change it if you want. I'm going to put 180 in for that, and that is what we use to calculate horsepower. And then I'm going to go back down to save. Okay? And I'm going to save it. Don't forget to do that. A lot of people get in the middle of stuff and they forget, and it's not right. So that's how you create a database. If you need to fix an existing database, to do that, it's really pretty simple. You just highlight it. Let's say this 2017 one is wrong by the weight. I can just highlight it or click on it on the left-hand side and fix whatever I need to fix. Let's say it's 1850, press enter, and then save. That's how you fix an existing database. And then to get out of this database area, of course, we'll just go down the bottom right. Most of the time, exiting out of any screen in Crew Chief is the bottom right area. That's the correct one. You can also delete existing databases with this button right here, and that will wipe out all of the runs associated with that database in one shot. So if you no longer own a car and you've already started putting runs in a new database, you can wipe out all the old runs too. But be very careful, because I can't help you if you get it wrong. We'll exit out of there. I'm going to erase the drawings. We're going to go over some stuff on the run entry that's going to make life a whole lot simpler for you. On the run entry screen, we have some new things in part of the Crew Chief program. And one of them I want to go over is you no longer need decimal points for anything. I'm going to pull up a different run, though. Let me just do that. And I'm going to do something kind of cool here. On the run entry screen, these two labels that say database and track. You see that? You can right-click on either of those words, database or track, and it'll do an instant search on it. You can also use the search menu at the top here, but I found that if I add things to the program that make more sense, as long as you know what they do and where they are, it's a lot faster. So I'm going to right-click on database, and it's immediately going to pull up all the runs I've made at that database. So I'm just going to pull one up on the screen, a different one. This is Gainesville, and so I'm going to go through. Let me exit. So just so you know, let's go over some of these features here. Okay, let's say, for example, let me just find it. Probably a better run there. That would be better. Like here, I was 007 on the tree in this run. In the new version of Crew Chief, hold on a second. I hate to do this, but I don't have very good internet access all of a sudden. Hold on. Okay. So hopefully that wasn't the problem for everybody, but so getting back to this, reaction time. When you're entering runs, you no longer need decimal points. So that's a 007 line. All I need to do is type 7 and press enter, and it'll put 007 in. If it was a 17 line, just type 17, press enter. See how it puts the 0.017 for you automatically. It was a 1067 60 foot. I don't need a decimal, 1067. For those decimally challenged, this is a godsend. You don't even need it on mile an hour, 150, 43. See that? It just puts the decimals where they belong. As soon as you press enter, it'll know what it is that you're doing and have some general idea of what's going on. Okay, other things on the run entry screen that are important for your data logging is this new drop-down list here is how dark or light it was. And that we store that with the run. Works out great. That way you know it's dark, light, whatever, and it appears in your logbook. So again, here's the split intervals. The 60 to 330 took 1.92. The 330 to 660, 1.63. And then these fields here are how far I was over or under the dial and my total package. Okay, it's not a very good run, but I didn't have to. A particular event and a particular run, I got to win. So here is a better example of a good run for Don Higgins. Let me erase the line. As you see, I was 002 on the tree, and I was dead one. So I was 1 thou on perfect, and that's what this field right here is. I was 1 thou away on my dial, and I had a total package of 3 thou. So, and that's, I lifted just barely. It says down the bottom here, great job, Higgins, 6 thou total package. And just made a really good run. But I just want to show you where those fields are. So again, erase the drawings. You don't need decimals here. So it's a 002 light. I don't have to put period 002. I just type 2 and press enter. See, fills it all in for you. There are two things that are going to be a great help here. One, it fixes data entry errors for you without telling you. And secondly, we fix the really nasty error that can cause the predictions to be way off simply because you typed the wrong information. We're smart enough to know that a run doesn't make sense at 29 seconds at the 330. So as soon as you press enter, if you have 29.68 seconds in there, we're going to fix it for you, but we're not going to tell you. We just fix things, move on, so you don't have a lot of time involved in data entry. And it fixes all. So that's an important area. Again, you can, this stuff is on some of the files that we've put in. You might see them on your right-hand side there, or something you can download after the webinar's over. There'll be screenshots and all sorts of stuff that you can look at when you're done. Same thing applies to temperature, humidity, barometer, all that. 76.6, even though this comes from your weather station, if I type 766 and press enter, we're smart enough to know 766, it puts 76.6 in there rather than 766 degrees. Again, these are things designed to improve the predictions because we fix data entry errors for you. And the other thing that's important on this screen is this traction meter field. This is a 0 to 100, how you felt the track was. Very important. I don't predict with anything in the 70s, unless I don't have any choice. And 82 to 85 is about the minimum that I can trust the car. If you go to Orlando or South Georgia Motorsports Park during one of their Pro Mod events that takes your shoes off, that's probably a 95 to 100. But record that information because it'll help you later on if you're trying to decide what run to base it off of. If your traction meter numbers in the 70s and you know it just wasn't a good run, it won't be a good prediction. It never works out well. Okay, so we've covered that. Let's see, wait a second. Switch runs we covered, and the light meter field. So let's go to the logbook. That's another area that's really important here for predictions. You can click on event logbook down here, or you can use control and the letter L as in Larry, and it will fire this event logbook button for you. You can also go to the log view menu at the very top middle of the screen there, or I circled, and you can either go to this event or you can pick different events to go to your logbook. The logbook is a very, very important feature of crew chief software. And unlike any other software program, it's designed for drag racing and it works really, really well for that purpose. So here what happens is here's all the runs side by side. Now there's a great deal of runs here. It might be kind of hard to see, but in between the columns are the differences. You may go and pull up a different. But I just want to show you all the differences are these little numbers right between. And then the difference in density altitude is right there, difference in range of water, relative humidity, difference in split time intervals, all these little numbers between the columns. Very important. Now, also on here, above each column is a See It button. I'm going to circle through all of this. These buttons that say See It, they allow you to instantly go to that run by clicking them. You'll see some of them are in red. The red means that it was a run completion run, where I hit the brakes and it completed the run. It turns those red to let you know that was a run completion. So if I want to see this run, let me just, this one towards the end here, it's 451 pass. I just let me erase the drawing so you can tell what I'm doing. I want to see this run right here. So I'm going to click the See It button right where the arrow is. And you'll find out that that run will be on my run entry screen just like that. That's how, another way you can make it work. You know, you can find whatever run you're looking for very rapidly. You can use the search menu at the top of the screen. Up here, you can use the switch to runs, these right here and here. These switch runs here, or you can use the logbook that we just left here and pull up runs that way as well. But I want to go back and show you the logbook again. I'm going to go Control L and pull this up. And there's still a lot of runs here, but I want to show you some other things on the event logbook button that will help predictions. In the upper left here, there's some buttons, and one of them says Stats. This orange button in the upper left. If you click it, it will show you all your averages for both lanes. Okay? I've only had 2 runs on the left, and my average reaction time is horrible. The ET is that. Now in the right lane, my average is 4 thou, and my average ET is 453. So that tells me that I don't like the left lane. I shouldn't probably be telling people. But for some reason, historically, I don't like the left lane, which is weird because I've won a lot of events in the left lane, but we'll see what we're about. So on this, it shows you the averages straight up. Now on the bottom right of this orange little screen here is 2 little buttons. One says normal and the other one says trim. That's a trimmed average where we take the high and the low out of these calculations. So I'm going to change it to trimmed. It won't change the left. It'll take the left out because there's only 2 runs. It can't average that by taking the high and the low. But it changed. My average reaction time didn't change much. My average ET went from 453 to 454. So I'm going to go back to normal. Or it's not a huge difference. And that's what I'm looking for. My average reaction time with all of the lights in there was 004. With the high and the low taken out, it's still 004. So that tells me I'm fairly consistent. Exactly how I'm able to pull that off sometimes, but it's very important that you are. And that's on 15 runs. My average light for the last 15 runs was 004. I think I could win a whole lot of events too. But that also means that I've had a couple of red lights probably too. I'm going to erase the drawings, but that's an important thing to use. The other thing that's up here is a green button that says CW. And CW is this right up here, CW, right in the upper left, and that brings up a bright green screen that has the current weather on it. Now, this used to be a lot more important than it is. You can drag this around by clicking on the top and moving it around. But it shows you the current weather coming from your weather station, and you can compare it with what's on the screen here, trying to find a run that you like as a good baseline. Again, that used to be a lot more important than it is, but it's available to you, and you can print it. If I decide to print, if you bring a printer, this is actually pretty cool. It's trying to print it. Let's see. Yeah, it's trying to print it. There we go. So that's a run, a good run. Bradenton, Florida, 8-mile, 190 shift. Decent run. So let's go and cover a few more things, and then we're getting right into predictions. Okay, we have Let's see. Pull back. Where? What is it? A second. Another thing is the opponent tab. You should put all opponents in. It won't make a difference in your predictions, but it helps you to race better by a long shot. The other option you have to make you a better driver is on the opponent information tab. Okay, that's the tab. That's time slip simulator. Because when you enter your opponent's information, you don't need decimal points there either. It will automatically tell you how many feet and inches you are ahead or behind, and then you'll get the minion guy if you win over here. It tells you how many feet you took the stripe by. You took the stripe by 6.6 feet, but I was red. And I didn't get the opponent number there, but I would put that in and keep track of it. But Time Slip Simulator is this orange button right here in the middle of the screen. It's an option, but I want to show you guys how it works real quick. What it does is it puts all of the ET information into a video game, and you can watch your run from all different angles. Here, I can see it from my point of view. I can watch it. That's me in the other lane. I can go to my lane, and there's how the race looked. Let me go and show you a couple other ways to do this here. We can look down. We'll go to TV mode and play this again. Here it is, like the ESPN camera. But it stops right at the finish line, and it'll tell you, basically how it looks. So you can switch. I can go to my lane. I'm going to play, and I'm going to watch my opponent the whole way through. Here's the line. Or I can watch from above. And you can even go to super slow motion in here to slow it down. I found that it's really important for junior dragsters, but I use it all the time as well, because if I think I took 2 feet at this race and I took 6, then obviously I've done something wrong. It's about the best $80 you spend a year for anything. It really comes in handy. Okay, run completion is the next tab over. And what run completion does is it tells you what you would have run if you hadn't lifted. Right there. And it has different formulas here. A lot of people don't realize this exists, and they don't put in runs that they're lifted. And you should. Because this completion formula in the bottom right, I would use the 330 momentum as our new formula. And it really works out well for predictions. I mean, it works out great. The other thing that's new, and this is the 7.96 version, is you are allowed to choose a different baseline run right there. And let's show you how this works. You choose a different baseline run, you say, now I want to use this run. It'll change the prediction logic based on it, if it senses the need to do that. So if you had a bad run before that, you can go back a couple of runs and do run completion before that. Very important that you use run completion if you're on the brakes, and that you have to accept this. You have to, if it gives you an ET, you click accept new ET, we'll go back in the run and fix it. You put the runs in just like the time slip says, and let run completion fix them for you. Very important. Okay, can I make, in run completion, can I make it a 552 in this example? In case you disagree with the prediction, you absolutely can type over it. You just type over the field right here and the mile per hour right below it, type over, and then click accept new ET. And it will go in and use what you tell it. It's very unusual that you would have to override this, especially when there's 3 different formulas to choose. But if you do, you do. So let's go to the predict screen and start on that. A couple of really important things to cover are what you see on the screen. First and foremost, on the bottom left is our weather counter. This counts every time the weather station takes a weather reading, and it will start from 0 every time you start the program. Make sure if you have a trailer weather station that you are getting the weather counter and it is counting. Too many people call me and say the predictions are wrong, and then I find out that they didn't plug in the weather station. So of course the predictions will be in la la. So just so you know, that's very important. Okay. Other things that are on here, the base run. What run is on the screen when you went in to predict? The current is the current weather conditions coming from your weather station. The difference column here just does the math. You know, it looks at the differences and calculates it's 22.8% difference in relative humidity, 0.05 in barometer, the difference in dew point. It's the math right there. Now, you'll see some things like this in yellow. Anything in yellow means watch out. Okay, because the yellow means that you've changed something and it's quite different. You'll normally see this in the 60-foot area and in the weight area, which is right down here. If you see yellow, that means take a look and see why it's yellow. Yellow can happen normally, but usually that means you typed something that we just want to make sure you understand what you've done. So let's erase this. So in yellow right now is my estimated 60 foot. It's substantially quicker than the 103 that was in the base rate. So here's the 60-foot area. When I tell somebody, I say, what do you have drop down in your 60-foot area? That's where this pink arrow and circle is. You can drop this down and let it automatically make changes to your 60 foot. So I drop it down, and usually we'll use the second option down, which is density adjusted 60 foot. And if you notice, it changed the 60 foot formula. You can pick many different ones out of this list, but density adjusted is kind of my go-to. It usually will be very close during the day and night. If you're on alcohol, you may want to drop that list down and go to vapor pressure adjusted 60 foot or humidity adjusted 60 foot if you're finding that your 60 foot's dropping off dramatically because of that. So if I go vapor pressure adjusted 60 foot, it's much quicker. Humidity adjusted 60 foot, it's a 102.43. In my case, I can use the DA barrel and relative humidity, the second from the bottom. I'll double check that. I'll say, okay, well, I don't think it's going to be that quick. Density adjusted says it's a 102.69. I believe that. Then I can go down to the bottom and say, what's my average 60 foot for all the runs in this database? I click on it, it's a 103.5. If I cannot make a decision, many times I'll go down to that average and I'll say, you know what? On average, that's probably pretty close. And it's telling me I'm go 449. And I could, at 1,100 feet, I could say it's probably pretty close. So it's doing predictions now. We're going to cover each one of these. But that 60-foot area is very important that you know, because I'm going to be asking you about it if you call me. So when it does this, it's staying in yellow, if you notice, and it says my 60 foot's 4 thou quicker than the base run. And the total ET is going to change by 5.5 thousandths. That's what it's calculating. This is the ET change column. This is where all the numbers will be for whatever formula you're using. So I'm going to drop this down, get rid of all these drawings, and let's go over this stuff. So other parts of the prediction, we have crew chief number 1. This is an independent formula. That's the first one. Vapor pressure used to be my go-to formula, but I've changed the other formulas now, and it's, you know, a lot of people still use it, but my favorite is the first and the third. That's your chosen formula is the last one, and that is controlled by whatever you choose in this drop-down list that I'm putting this pretty arrow on. Okay? That list controls the third formula and a little bit of the vapor pressure formula. Let me drop that list down and show you what happened. So notice these predictions that are coming over 449.2, 448.5, and 449.6. I'm going to drop the list down, and here's a list of pre-canned formulas that people have asked for over the years and that we've come up with on our own. The first one that I'm going to go to is about half to three-quarters way down is DA, half barrel, half humidity. That formula is a kind of a go-to for most people. I drop it down, and it says I'm going to go 448, 447, 449. And let's show you why it's coming up with its answer. So it says 448. I come over here to the ET change column, okay? And it says, because the humidity is worth 100th in ET, the barometer is 0.0021. The density altitude is worth 1.5 hundredths quicker. And then my 60 foot is going to be a little slower for whatever reason it is. Okay. So it starts totaling all this up, and it takes this base run over here, and it does the simple math. So anything that has zeros in it means it's not part of the formula. Like horsepower correction's got nothing. Wind speed's got nothing because we haven't turned the wind on. So when you select a formula, look at the ET change column here to see what is changing and how much. Because if you don't agree with something, you just have to look at one of these and say, okay, I don't trust that part of it. I don't think the humidity is 100 quicker like it is showing right here. Okay, fine. This is for you to decide. You can pick horsepower correction. Like for example here, let me go over what happened. And you'll notice when I pick HP correction, let me draw this line here. I chose HP correction factor. Now all the ET changes up here that had numbers are gone. But down here, it has numbers because it's based on horsepower correction. That's what this correction factor is. And it's looking at the difference and saying it's worth 1.5 quicker. And it says it's going to go 449.6, 449.1, and 448.3. Okay? We haven't taught crew chief yet much of anything, but I'm just showing you what is happening when you choose a formula. If I pick late night with humidity, like guys using alcohol, what happens is now the HP correction one has 0 in it, and the only thing that really has anything in is humidity. Doesn't look at density, altitude. Those of you on alcohol, this is the formula a lot of them use. Very accurate if your car is sensitive to water content in the air, and not really much of density, altitude. Those of you on gas, it's not, we don't really use it that often. I've been known to do it because when the humidity gets to about 90%, I start concerning myself with it because a lot of times that'll put water droplets on the ground that I can't get in the tractor. So again, I'm going over the formulas right now to let you know what they do and why. There's DA, baro, and humidity, which takes the full effect of humidity and DA and barometer. There's the half baro one, DA with half baro, half humidity, which again is the go-to one. There's temperature, baro, and relative humidity. Now, this formula is only really used by smaller motors, stock eliminator guys. Or, I do this a lot. When I get hired by a stock eliminator team that has a smaller cubic inch motor, or even like the supercharged Fords that I did with Skillman, that was our go-to formula, and I could put that car within a few thou every single time. So when that happens, it's looking at temp, baro, and relative humidity, not density, altitude anymore, not horsepower, nothing else. You also have a formula for, which I don't use that often anymore, temp, barometer, and dew point. For those that aren't affected by humidity as much as they are dew point, well, then it will look at dew point differences. Okay, these are our pre-canned ones that you can use rapidly to test between. I use density altitude barometer a lot when I go to Las Vegas. That one works really well because you don't have any humidity. So when I pick DA, density altitude with barometer, it's looking at density, altitude, and barometer. It's not looking at humidity anymore or temperature. It's not part of the equation. So let me erase the drawings here. These are, again, our pre-canned ones. You'll find yourself switching between them, and that's a good thing to do. There's nothing wrong with testing. You can do that. And the best part about this, if I get one that I think is too fast and one that's too slow, then go down to the bottom where it says average several formulas. And I can drop this down. I can say, okay, I want density altitude with barometer. and I want DA, half barrel, half humidity average, and I want the HP correction. Okay, and then I click done. So what I've done here is I've just told it, let's use DA with altitude and barometer, DA with some barometer and humidity, and then the HP correction formula together. All three of them together, and then average them. And it's going to sound funky, but there are a lot of my customers that do this, and they are deadly accurate. When I click done, you need a fairly fast computer when you're doing this, because now you're doing 100,000 calculations times 3. So don't select every one of them. You bring even a fast computer to their needs. Each formula has 100,000 lines of code. So you'll see now how when I did this, all three of them together come up with an answer that's 449 with a 4. Okay, great. It may be the exact number. And two of them, the formulas are agreeing with each other. Okay? So again, this formula, these bottom two here, will learn. Especially this one, we can teach it with the factors and calculate ratios, what it means to do this. But these are the pre-canned ones that will work right out of the box, that will be very close. And feel free to average the ones I just told you, because I do that a lot myself. Okay, we haven't covered crew chief number 1 because that's a separate formula. We're going to go through this real quick because this formula is new for the 7.96 version and just came out. Just want to show you how it looks when you're using it the right way. Okay, so crew chief number 1. How is crew chief number 1 calculated? Well, let me show you how this works. Right here is the label for crew chief number 1. I'm circled in the pink. I'm going to draw a little arrow to it. If you want to know how it arrived at its answer, double click the crew chief number 1 formula, right where I'm pointing with that wonderful artistic arrow. Let me show you. I'm going to double click on it, and it's going to pop up and tell you how it arrived at its answer. Okay? The base run ET was 450 with a 6. It has no temperature adjustment. Nothing is adjusting. All these are zeros. But this new thing called Vapor HP, we're going to go over in a second, has got .0 or minus .0178, and then the 60-foot time is positive. And so its answer is 449.37, or rounded to 449.3. That's probably all we can do. So you can see how it arrived at its answer in the snapshot. And then when you're done, you can just click OK, return on the bottom. So how do we adjust this? Well, let's show you. If you want to adjust crew chief number 1, and I highly recommend you do this in experiment, you just click right where my arrow is pointing. Okay? Click. A box will pop up, and you'll notice that crew chief software will always use the similar boxes. When they come up, they kind of look the same. They're choices that you can make by checking. And over here are the values for crew chief number 1. So if you go to somebody's seminar and they say, you know, we want you to use 300 feet of DA and 6.5 of vapor pressure and 6.5 of barometer, then you can create your own. I made this originally for the Jake Coughlins and the Peter Biondos and people like that of the world that have their own handwritten formula that they want crew chief to emulate, because they'll look at my crew chief answers, but they'll always go back to their handwritten way of doing it. It might take them 5 minutes to get the answer, but they wanted that answer, so I created this formula for them. It's not always going to be that way when you get it, but you can make it do anything you want. And it will only affect crew chief number 1. So let's go over how this works. So in this particular case, this is a brand new formula for crew chief called Vapor HP Correction. Don Higgins created it himself, me. And what it is, it's a horsepower correction that adds water content, because the horsepower correction that is currently out there in SAE formulas does not look at water near the level that I think it should. especially if you're on alcohol, it just doesn't seem to work. The HP corrections are worthless, I think. So what I use is I check vapor HP correction, and a lot of times I'll check barometer as well. Okay, those two together make a really good number. So what do I use? Here's my answers. These two right here. And this is not labeled to the right. And there's a reason. It's an experimental thing, but it's for large changes. So I use 0.00890 on the left-hand side and 0.0125 on the right for large swing. You're welcome to test it. There's nothing wrong with testing. So over here, if I use barometer, I look to the right of barometer and it says 0.1 of barometer is 100. That's all that really is, pretty simple. You can have different density altitudes and adjusted altitudes. You can check whatever you want. But in this case, vapor HP correction, the only other thing you're going to check possibly is barometer. And that's it. That formula does a lot on its own. And I'd like you guys to test it and see how it works. Now, if you're on alcohol, alcohol usually not doubles, but the low number would be 0.013 or 0.015, and the high number would be 0.0175. Are good starting points. If you don't catch this, just email me later and I'll give you some numbers to try. There's nothing wrong with experiment. So in this case, I'm going to check barometer and this vapor HP correction, and then I'm going to click on the save button on the bottom, and we're going to see what happens. Don't forget to save it right here. Now, if you tinker with this and everything goes wrong, you can always click this little middle button here, and it says Use AA Default. And that will go back to the factory settings of Crew Chief software and go back to the way it used to be. But tinker, there's nothing wrong with playing with it and seeing what happens. When I did that, it went to a 448.8. And so let's, if you remember what I told you a few minutes ago, let's double click on Crew Chief number 1 here and see why it came up with the answer that it did. So I double click. It comes up, says the barometer is worth 4,000 and the vapor HP is now worth almost 200, 0.0193. So it says it's going to be a high 48. It may very well be. It would be pretty close. Before I get into the rest of it, let's show you how we factor or find if we believe in this or not. So I want to bring your attention to the current column before we get into anything more advanced. In the current here, all these fields have events on them, which means that I can right-click on anything and it will instantly show me all the runs that are similar. So for right now, the weather station DA, right, I put an arrow on, is 1,084. I'm going to right-click on that. What it's going to do is it's going to show me all the runs at around that area, plus or minus 100, 150 feet. And when I do, it showed me a whole bunch of runs. This is a normal search screen. It found 50 runs down. Well, a lot of these runs aren't relative to what I'm doing. Some of them are quarter mile, etc. But to the right of that, there's a little checkbox in the bottom right where I'm circling. I'm going to put a big arrow on it that says Show Current Database Only. When I do that, I put a little checkbox on that. It gets rid of everything but this database. And now I've got useful information. Let me erase the drawing so we can see what we're looking at here. I'll put some more markers here. It shows me the ETs for all of these. It shows me the date. And down here, it gives me the averages for all these runs, both lanes. So on the bottom of the screen, it shows me my average reaction time, average 60 foot, average ET for both lanes. So my average ET is about a 450 on the left. So here's the density altitudes right there that it's searching on, plus or minus. You notice it did all this instantaneously. Now, if you don't have lane when you do this column I'm circling right now, and I'm going to put an arrow, give me an email and I'll walk you through how to get lane. you'll click on this options button to do it. It's really simple, but I won't bother everybody with it. So that shows you all the runs you've made under similar conditions. You can double click on any of these runs and say, okay, there's 448, 449, a 453, and a 454, which probably weren't very good runs. And they weren't, because here's the 60 foot. 105, 60 foot would be horrendous. 102, that's pretty common, 103. So I'm looking to keep away from a 105, 60 foot, somewhere around a high 102, mid 103, and I should be pretty close. That 453 doesn't make sense to me. This 447 looks good, and it just depends on how old the run was, because here's the dates over here. And this is how we verify. If it's a good run, you should see similar ETs to your prediction. In my case, these older runs are faster now than the newer runs. So a little bit. I'm running a little less timing, and I have a much smaller carburetor than I used to. So maybe they're not that useful, but I want to make sure of it. I'm going to cancel out of here. But if I had selected that run, any of those runs, they would be the baseline run. Let's see what the questions are. Are these runs in the same database or overall? Well, overall at first, and then I clicked, if you remember, that show this database only, and it got rid of all of the other databases and just showed me that. Wayne was talking about here, when I right-clicked, it showed a whole bunch of runs. But I went down to the bottom right, in here, show current database only. I put a checkbox in that, and it immediately gets rid of everything but this database. Erase, and so in this particular case, it's telling me 448's all this from a 450 pass. And maybe that's too quick. So how do we teach crew chief that it's wrong? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. We can use the factors tab. So let me go over some of the things that are here. This is the factors tab. Okay? This is where the magic happens that controls the prediction. And then next to it is calculate ratios, where we'll teach crew chief. Okay? Now I go to factors, and it has factors for small changes in weather, and an orange one for larger swings in weather. Because crew chief can learn both short or small weather changes and large weather changes very quickly. So I can go into factors if I know something's wrong and change it. I can say, no, it needs to be higher or lower, whatever it might be. Now, if you get it all screwed up and crew chief is not predicting well at all, you'll go to this factors tab, look at these factors. Sometimes I'll tell people, take a picture with your phone. And if it's just not working, on the bottom right is reset factor. Okay, reset factors will change everything back to the defaults of where we want you to start. That's that button on the bottom right. It'll make wholesale changes to your factors. And I mean, if they're all screwed up, if they're nowhere near what they should be, because here's our recommended starting factors right here. Okay, that column there says you ought to have 2.45 temperature, 9.3, and humidity 9.29, and that's close. All of mine match. Okay, so resetting my factors wouldn't do anything at all. But if yours are la-la, like if you're on alcohol and it's showing 150 feet of DA instead of the 400 and something, I'd reset your factors first before we go on. Okay? The fuel type used, that all comes from your database, all of this. So if it's wrong, which I do go to people's trailers a lot that say the predictions are in la-la land, and they're running on alcohol, but they've chosen racing gas, stuff like that you got to be cognizant of, because that's your input, not ours. So another thing down here is this little checkbox on factors that says show base date and run number. And I'll show you why this is important in just a second. But down here, I'm going to put a big arrow next to it. You should have this checked. Nothing. It shows you something important on the predict screen. When you have that checked, erase the drawing. Then on the bottom middle of the screen, it shows you what run is on the screen. The run date, the run number, and the lane. Very important. So when you're switching runs, you have that. So why did I bring that up now? Because you can switch runs right here on the bottom left of your predict screen. A lot of people don't know this, and this speeds up predicting very quickly. So if I say, no, I don't believe that run was a very good run, I can switch back a run and pull up a completely different run. I can switch to next, go back to it. I can go to the next one after that. But if I go back and I say, okay, I know that run was a fluke or whatever it might have been, I can switch to the run I want. But every time I do that, it will update this information in the middle of the screen in the bottom, the baseline run date, run number. So if you watch that, when I switch to next, it changed the run date and the run number if necessary. And switch back a run. And what that does is I cycle through runs a lot of times and I look at what it's predicting. Because there's, out of 5 runs, my car will make one kind of oddball run. And it can be because it's running 440 sometimes, and if the track's not very good, I have to detune it, take a lot of launch RPM out of it, and some timing out of it, whatever it takes to get the thing to go down the track. So I can have a run that goes 448, and then I realize I was a handful, I slow it down to 452, for example. And then the car's more dialable because it's not on the edge of spinning the tire boat. Whatever it might be, but when I do that, I have to switch to different runs in order to find the one that best mimics what's about to happen. Okay? Again, that's what you use the switch runs for, is you can immediately move back and forth between runs. So at 1,172 feet, I can right-click on it and say, okay, how many runs have we made that are similar? And the average ET during that time is a 451, 452, basically. And that's about what the predictions are coming up with. That's what we do. The next thing before I go to calculate ratios and go on the rest is this button here in the bottom middle that says Search Weather. Search Weather will allow you to combine searches. So not only whatever you're right-clicking is one thing in the current column that I went over earlier. But with Search Weather, one of those pick boxes will come up and say, search by multiple things. Okay? What that means is that I can not only search by density altitude, but I can add barometer, which is a popular thing for me. Those of you on alcohol, you could add grains of water or vapor pressure and check those. Right there, and it would start searching. But when I combine barometer and density altitude, these two fields together, it found one run. It'll tell you how many runs it found right here. Only one run did I make that was similar in both density, altitude, and barometer, and that's important. I can go down here to display runs and pull it up and see what it ran. It also automatically pulled off anything older than 2 years. It didn't include unless I force it to by changing the beginning date. So let me show you how this works. So I'm going to go to display runs, and I said, okay, let me erase the drawings here. The only run that matched the barometer and the density altitude, it went a 450 with an 8. Okay, so in reality, it ought to be predicting somewhere around a 451. And if not, why not? So in this case, it's a 452. And I can say, okay, whatever reason, it could be because of wind, and then I can go here and say, okay, wind changes predictions, but it won't matter. I don't have the wind sensor connected right now. So I have no wind speed and no wind direction here, and in the base run, I have no wind speed. So if there's no wind speed, doesn't matter what the wind direction is, it's not going to work. So if I had wind, that would be more important. I could say, okay, maybe wind was the problem. Okay, and then it would work on prediction. So if I go down here and change it to 10 mile an hour at 180 tailwind, there's my 451 prediction on the right. You see, it all changed. Maybe it's wind. Don't know. But if I'm within 100th of whatever the prediction it's saying, if what it tells me the historical thing has been within 100, I feel a lot better. Okay? That's how we do this. So now let's go back to the factors tab. And we're going to take a look at what all these factors mean. I'm going to throw all the bouncing back and forth here. So each factor has a reason. Temperature, the first one is temperature slash O1ET. If you use a formula with temperature, it takes 2.45 degrees on the low numbers, 9.3% humidity, 14.7 on the barometer going down, and 9 points of barometer if it gets better. Why is that different? People ask me all the time. What do these two numbers mean? Well, barometer is a very important thing for people in gas especially. But you'll notice that as the barometer goes down, it gets worse. The car will slow down sometimes in a nice leisurely way. But when the barometer gets better, you might be going into your jetting. In other words, if you are a little bit bad on jetting and the barometer goes up 14 points, you now hit like the perfect air fuel mixture because barometer's nature is a little supercharged. So what's that mean is that I proved over years and years of experimenting that there's different barometer factors. As it gets worse, there's one set of factors. As it gets better, there's another set. And it works. So a lot of times I'll tell people to switch these numbers around a little bit. You know, like a small motor might be 0.06 good and 0.09 bad, for example. So you can experiment with those, and that will change how the prediction works. There's the dew point right below that. H-speed factor is right here. There's a little box here. Don't worry about that. That's in testing mode. The density altitude set at 282 feet, which is exactly what the defaults are. And this is when I'm bracket race. When I do any other kind of racing, it's not anywhere near 200. Adjusted altitude is 145 feet. Vapor pressure factor is 0.159. Grains per pound. Now, if I'm not using a formula with grains, it doesn't matter, but when I do turn on a grains formula, it takes about 15 or 16 numbers of grains to change my car 100. And then here is the DA difference to use large swings or small swings. So once the density altitude climbs above 700 feet difference, it will automatically switch to this orange tab. Let's show you what that means. So behind the scenes, it will switch. And these numbers are different than the small changes are. Not much sometimes, but they should be different. Because if there's a 1,000-foot change in density altitude, it's not normally a consistent, say, 270 feet per 100. My car in quarter-mile racing could be 220 feet on large swings and 270 on small, or vice versa. But they can be different. The crew chief will automatically figure it out for you in this calculate ratios when we get into it. But all of these numbers are different, or should be a little bit different than the starting base factors that you see to the right. Okay? That's what large swings are automatic. They will take care of it on their own. Again, a lot of questions on this stuff in the middle here. Again, these were some sample or some testing formulas we made basically for Las Vegas, Nevada, because barometer on there changed so dramatically, we had to overcompensate for it. Those were still in test mode, and I really haven't done anything. So don't worry about it. If they're not checked, they won't be involved. Other things on the predictions are the factors for wind. Okay? Even if you don't have wind turned on, it's a good idea to look at those. Again, when I'm eighth mile racing, I have an eighth mile factor or database for the vehicle type, which will have different headwind and tailwind factors. Side wind is a ratio, 50% of headwind. Crosshead and cross tails are set at 99, but when I quarter mile race, these are like at 150, which is 150% of the headwind or tailwind. Use wind very carefully. I'll explain that in a little while. The other stuff, the fuel we've already covered. the 60 foot to 01 ratio, right here. This is, if you lose 160 foot, it says you're going to lose 1.3 hundredths total. That's what the 131 is. So if you lose 160 foot, you lose 2 down track, that number should be 2.0. If you lose 1 to 1, that's fine. You know, we'll just leave it at 1 to 1. Now, the next line down is the DA per 60 foot. This is when I select density adjusted 60 foot, it takes 948 feet to change my car 160 foot. That's all that means. You can move that lower if it's really sensitive to weather and 60 foot, or make it 1,500 feet if you're on alcohol and nothing really changes. Okay, and the next line down is the track temperature. If you guys take track temperature and use a track temperature adjusted 60 foot, and this number here, we can start at 0.049. That's a pretty good number to start with. And those of you with stockers or whatever that change weight, there's a weight factor controller right there. That's probably pretty rare. But there's some stockers that we use. So that's, in effect, the factor string. Okay? The next one I want to cover, though, is how does crew chief learn? Okay? So here's calculate ratios. We're going to go to this real quick and explain calculate ratios for red. So here's calculate ratios. Let me erase the drawings. Calculate ratios is designed to tell us what the prediction should be and teach crew chief what it means. So you'll see crew chief has a lot of these. Number 1, number 2, number 3. So we're trying to make things as simple as possible, even though it's kind of impossible. The base run is the run that you had on the prediction screen or the run entry screen. So that's run number 1 from 1219. Here's the ET, 451, 153 an hour. Number 2 is all of the other runs that are in that database. Okay? None of them are analyzed right now because none of them have been selected. But this is where we'll pick runs, usually from the same event. I would be very hesitant to go from Florida to Illinois and start double-clicking on runs, but we're going to actually do that, show you how crew chief learns for large swings in weather. I hope there's a weather station running in the background. I hope that humming noise isn't really in this. But it is. I'll try to edit it out, but I don't think I can do that. So what this does is we will pick runs to analyze. I'm going to go here and pick a run. Usually it's from the same weekend. But just for giggles, let's pick one of these runs from Illinois to compare a different one. I'm going to double click on it. And when I did, it says analyze. So I'm going to stop here and draw some stuff. When I double clicked on this number 2 line here, it says analyze. It highlighted the whole row in yellow. And let's see what it does. And now in number 3, it came up with a DA ratio. It's trying to learn. It comes up with an AA ratio, horsepower correction factor ratio. It just did the math for us. And then it goes over here and says, based on that, that run should have been about a 457 if the prediction logic was right. That run that went 455 should have been a 457. What is that trying to tell us? It's telling us that the factors used for large swings in weather are not accurate. How do I know that? Because the DA difference and the AA difference here that I'm circling in the bottom middle, I'm going to put an arrow next to it just so you know, tells me that there's 1,898 feet difference in DA. I'm going to put an arrow next to it. That's a large swing, very large swing. It's not even the same track, so I don't usually do this. But it's telling me that what was, if you remember, I had 272 feet, I think, change that car 100th for large swings in weather on the factor screen. You guys remember when that factor screen that I was on a little bit ago, that's what the large swing was. And crew chief is saying, no, that's not right. It should be 413 feet, which is over here. It says, no, that 272 is not right because it didn't come up with the right answer. But if you let us change it to 413, you'll get the correct prediction for a large swing. And how do we do that? Let me erase the drawing because there's a lot going on. Let me bring your attention to the bottom right. This box, or this little command button we call it, says update large factors. This is all you have to do to teach crew chief. I'm not going to click it because it's not the same track. Usually I'll only do the same track, unless I don't have any choice. But in this case, if I click update large factors, it's going to go in and change the temperature factor, all the factors that control this, to these numbers that are over here on the left-hand side. And then when it does that, it will change its answers and come up with a more accurate prediction. But because it's a different track, I really don't want to do that. There may not be anything wrong with it, but it might be one of those fluke things. So how do I know if it's a fluke? Well, we pick a different run. So I'm going to go back and say, okay, that was a 450. Let's try the next one down. And I double click on it, and notice in number 3 area, down the bottom still, it's now 386 feet, changes car 100. So it's revised its formula, and it says, it still thinks that it needs to be higher than the 272 that it currently. So let's pick one more. I don't normally pick any more than 3, just the way it is, and it's got to be a decent run. So let's pick one of these. And now it says 370 feet. So it's staying fairly consistent. It thinks it needs to be in the high 300s. In this case, that might be really, really close. So all I have to do is go to the bottom right and click Update Large Factors. And let's show you what happens. Erase the drawings and click Update Large Factors. And that's it. So let's go back to Factors now and show you what happens. Go back to this Factors tab. You see, when you know crew chief, it takes only a few seconds to teach it. So here I'm back to factors, but I'm not in the large weather change. I'm still in the small because it's not orange. I need to click on the orange tab here to see what it did to our factor. I'll click. And you notice now it's changed all of these numbers. Right there, right there, right there. It's changed all of this to way different numbers than we had before. That's all you have to do to teach crew chief. It's unusual that we would do it like this because, quite frankly, I don't like to switch between 2 different tracks and do this. Now, many of the tracks are getting better than they used to be, so there may not be anything wrong with it. But in my case, I'm always a little hesitant. So now the predictions aren't in the large weather swings. And how I know that is because there's only a 150-foot difference. And if you remember, it takes around 700 feet to move. So I'm going to go down to the bottom left here and find a different run that might be part of that large swing. Just forget it. Well, here we are at 755 feet. So if you remember this weather before, the predictions, all the predictions it was coming up with before on the search screen was a little different than this number. So I'm going to switch to a different run. I do remember that's a different setup altogether. Switch to a run that might be more inclined to find these, because these are all different setups than I'm running currently. Okay, 452, 458. 451. You can tell there's a couple of runs and they just don't make sense. So here it's telling me 450 with a 9, 450 with a 7, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to say, okay, let's verify. I know this is the same setup that I had before, so I can use these runs. So I'm going to right click on current EA. Then I'm going to show current database only, and it's averaging somewhere around 450, Let's go here. Let me show you what it's doing here. So the predictions on large swings here, it is saying my average ET is 451 down here in the bottom, 451.3. And let's see what the prediction is saying. If it's close, then I'm going to feel a lot better about the answer it gives. You can see it coming up with virtually the right answer. And I like that. I would believe that. Bruce wants to know about how we can elaborate on the logbook, and I will in just a minute, about reaction time and 60 foot. I'll keep that handy here and come back to it in a minute. But so if it comes up with a prediction and I look and I say, okay, why does it come up with the answer? And all I do here is I'm going to circle these weather variables and say, okay, the temperature is really close. The humidity is a little bit better, and the barometer is really close. So that run ought to be fairly close to a 450. Now, the only difference would be the 60 foot is really close. The crew chief is coming up with an answer that ought to be fairly close. So what I'm going to do is pick different formulas here and just see. I'm going to drop down and go from my averages, go back to my VA with barrel, half humidity. Still about the same number. VA by itself, real close to the same number. What I'm doing is double checking by picking different formulas. So I just picked temp barrel and relative humidity, come up with about the same. Horsepower correction, within 5,000. What I'm doing here is saying, okay, if all of these answers are within, say, 5 or 6 thousandths of a second, I feel pretty confident that the prediction is right. And I'm cycling, I should probably let you know what I'm doing. I'm cycling this formula right here, which is not going to affect crew chief number one. Crew chief number one is independent of what I do down here, down towards the bottom. And what I'm doing is spot watching what these answer right here, basically, and I'm comparing it with this. And if I'm selecting a bunch of different formulas and they're coming up with about the same answer as crew chief number one is, I feel really confident. If I went out there right now, I'd dial, if I wanted to dial hard, I'd dial 450. If I wanted to dial somewhat soft, like fairly soft, I'd dial a 51. And I would have 90% confidence, unless the wind or the track went nuts, that I would be within 4 thousandths of a second. When crew chief is right, it will almost always beat your reaction time. The margin of error will almost always be better than my reaction. So if I'm averaging 008 on the tree, my predictions should be better than 008 close. And many times I can be, just damn near dead on, unless the track goes around. So I'm going to go back to run entry here and show you an example of this. I had a car and a half at the last event I was at. Unfortunately, I didn't have a very good track. So I want to bring your attention to a real live race here. And I'm going to circle traction meter over here. I want to see something. So had a really good run there, 455. The traction meter, see here's 82, just barely good enough. Here's 80, not quite, it's starting to go away. Another 80, another 457, 78. As I told you before, I don't look at anything below 82 usually. I get a little scared of it. And then I go back another one. Here's a fairly decent run. That was a super fun. But so here's 80. Okay, predict the next one. It was slow. Shouldn't have been quite that slow, but I did change a few things. The next run, let me show you what crew chief was predicting, because anytime you put a run in, crew chief will fill all this out for you. This is what crew chief was telling me at the exact time it ran. 457, 457.7, 457.9. I dialed a 57, dialed hard. It went 457.6. Okay. I was 002 on the tree, so that 457.6 could have been a 457.8 to a 457.4. And these predictions were within what my reaction time. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And you can tell why I won this event. Here, the predictions were saying 457.1, 457.2. I dialed a 56. And the reason for that is because I didn't think the last run was all that great, and other people were breaking out. So I went down the number, and it ran exactly what the prediction said. Okay, it ran a 457.1, and it was predicting the same exact number. But my reaction time was 001 with a 4. So that's less, that was a 001 light, basically. So I was within 1 thou of, so I stayed with it for the next run. Here was a 007 light. I dialed a 456 and went 456.6 on the brakes. No, it wasn't. Never mind. So on this run, though, the track was 82. I'll put an arrow to there. And the prediction, I dialed a 6 and went on, but it was telling me 457.8 because I thought it would be a 102 60 foot, and it was a 1 flat, almost a 101. So I can live with that. That's the difference in reaction, or the difference in 60 foot. I can't fix that. The next run was E4. I was 15 on the tree. It told me 56.3, 56.4, and 56.4. I dialed a 56, went a 55.6, so I missed it by 4 thou. I was under by 4 thou. But my reaction time was a 15. My total package was 11. I was under, that was worse. And I even wrote a note, track much better. Okay, and then this is to the final round. Final round, I'm 007.9, 008 basically. I dialed a 55. It was telling me 55.6, 55.7, and went to 56.3. But if you look in the bottom middle, I circled car moved around at the ship. Yes, we won. Yay. He broke. So I didn't have to run all that. But that's how good it can be prediction-wise. And there are many times I can help customers do the same thing. But you got to understand a little bit about crew chief, how it learns, and you have to know whether it makes sense or not. Because there are times you're going to make a run where that traction meter should be, you might show it at 85, but it was really an 80. And that's right on the edge. Those of you who run top dragster and all that, I know Wayne does, you got to be very careful with the traction. So keep track of that traction meter. That will help you later on. We got another question popped up. Kevin's asking, what does tire growth affect and how do you adjust it? I really don't do a lot with tire growth. Now I calculated for it, and the reason I did that is because that's what we're talking about is right here, is people were telling me that certain brands of tires didn't grow as much as others. And some of them I didn't mile per hour nearly as well as others. I'm using Mickey Thompson's right now, which, they're okay. I've never had any problem with them. They've been consistent, and they're 3-year-old tires. I'm going to replace them. But tire growth tells me which tire grows the most for the mile per hour. And I only really look at this for quarter-mile stuff. 8th mile, I don't know how accurate it is. But it just tells you the circumference growth for the mile per hour that you run, the gear ratio. It's a calculator, basically. I don't use it in any predictions. It's for your reporting only. And Don's saying, my 60-foot changes by a 10th quite often. Wow. That's a real issue. And I don't know what to tell you to do about that other than more tire, perhaps. But if you're off a 10th and 60 foot, there's no way I can help you because the predictions are going to be based on whatever you put on the screen. And if you can't duplicate that, then we have an issue. Bruce, you had talked about the logbook, and I want to bring everybody's attention to this because this will identify bad runs. Okay, so I'm going to go to event logbook down here, Control L. We did this early on, but I didn't really get a chance to cover it because, quite frankly, the screen was too small for everybody to see. So I'm going to bring your attention to these. In between the columns are the differences, okay? So what I'm looking for is the two fields that are important are reaction time, which is right here, and 60 foot. These two here. I'm looking for an inverse reaction. So here, between the two was negative 0.004, perfectly good, and negative 60 foot. It picked up 15 thou and 60 foot. The next one, though, I was negative 0.002 on reaction time and 6 thou slower in 60 foot. And 6 thou could be an inverse, could be because of how I staged. I may have gone in a little bit deeper, and therefore I'm going to have a slower 60 foot NET usually, and a quicker reaction time. So I want to see double O's here. If I'm looking at your screen and your logbook and I see 009, 11, those kind of things, that means you've got an issue with how you stage. If both of them are negative, I'm okay. Both are positive, I'm okay. But I'm not okay when one goes positive and the other goes negative. Now, a 006 and 002 is not a big deal. However, if your 11 thou red and your 60 foot is 11 thou slow, then you get the correlation. What I'm trying to say is that you went in deep. And that can affect your ET and my prediction because you're going to dial off of that run. And then all of a sudden you're going to stage normally, and then you're going to pick up 100th or two just because how you stage. So that's the advanced part that will win you a lot of events. Here I'm 008 slower in reaction time, but I picked up 3 thou and 60 foot. So that means I was probably a little bit more shallow on this stage. Not terrible. As long as I'm in 00 territory, I'm okay. Same thing here. I was 7 thou quicker between these two runs. And then my 60 foot was 2 thou slower. It is what it is. I'm not too concerned about it. But when I start seeing what we call pogo sticking, which is high, low, every other pass, or if you go to a lane difference, if your track has one lane that you can go in deeper than the other, then that's going to affect how your reaction time and your 60 foot correlate and your ET. We race in a game of thousands, and if you're 100th slow in reaction time and you pick up 100 in ET, you're screwed. So staging properly is very, very important, and that's why you see the really good guys, they'll bounce in quite a few times before they get exactly where they want to be staged. And that makes predicting their car a whole lot simpler because everything is normal. I have been working on staging, and it shows here. I've done fairly well in this last event. I mean, I could put it wherever I wanted to put it, and I felt really good about that. But there have been times when I couldn't, I had to idle too hot, for example, and I couldn't bump in real nice and easy. So you have to have the idle high enough that when you deck it, it's going to come clean, but not so high that you have trouble staging the car. And there's a fine line between them. But the logbook will show you. When people say, hey, the predictions are wrong, I come here and I look at their logbook the first time. And if I see wildly different numbers here, I know that crew chief's going to be off 100th on one, too quick, too slow, too quick, too slow, because they're staging it. So what I look at is the difference in the DA, for example, 120, 67 feet worse, 151 feet better, all that I look at, and I say, okay, based on that, the car should move X. And it's got to be a consistent movement. So 67 feet should both be 456, and that's what they were. Style. Basically, they're real close. They're within 100. And they should be. And 8,000 of that reaction time and 3,060, that's 11 or 5,000 of it right there. So I'm only off 5,000. But that's track related more than about anything else. So you got to look at this logbook very carefully and say to yourself, what does it really mean to me? And I'll look at this and I'll print. Let me get rid of the drawings here. I'll print this logbook and it'll have even more information on it than what's on the screen because I have more spaces. I have more split intervals. I have more data. I have notes down here. A lot more information. Those of you that travel with a printer, you can print this and it's a badass logbook. I can go to my stats and see all the runs, the averages for both lanes. They're very consistent. I don't need any help there. So that's what we were talking about. The difference between how you stage can make a huge difference in the predictions. When I mean huge, I mean 100th for me is quite a bit. So if the track is good, and if you can tell me that it's 82 and higher in your gut instinct, 0 to 100 scale, then crew chief should be predicting better than your reaction time always. So again, let's go back to predict, and we'll cover one other area here, and then I'll take some questions. I don't want to keep you all night. I didn't cover wind. So let me cover wind real quick. And also I want to cover something that's shown up right now on the screen. See how wildly different these predictions are? This crew chief number 1 is in La La Land right now. And the reason for that is barometric pressure. Because that was an Illinois event to I'm in Florida. So all I'm going to do here with crew chief number 1, I'm going to click on it. You remember, I'm going to click right where that arrow is pointing. And I'm going to take barometer out of the equation and just leave the vapor HP correction. And now it goes a little bit nutty. It's a little too much. So what I can do is one of two things. I can either change the barometer reading to double it, 0.2, and then save it. And now we're in ballpark. What I just did is adjusted the barometer variable. I went to here and changed it from 0.1 to 0.2, which begs the question, why did I do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to be adding a large change for barometer. I have it in my version, but not on the version that I'm showing you. Right here, it's going to be large changes in barometer, and I'm going to be able to leave that 0.1 to the left and add say 0.2 to the right here, the large swing. That'll be coming soon, just for this purpose. So I know the barometer does not have the effect on my 8th mile bracket racing as what it was showing me. Let me see what the correction is. I hope that Bruce had answered your question about the reaction time in 60 foot. I think that you remember. Oh, maybe I didn't. Bruce, I didn't cover that. I covered the logbook version, but you were talking about the run entry. Let me do that real quick. And Lynette, it's good to see and hear from you. It seems your chosen formula is the most important. Which formula is best for 540 supercharged in alcohol? Well, Lynette, what I really use the DA half barrel, half humidity a lot of times. I'll use HP correction, or I'll average several. I'll use the DA half barrel, half humidity, a DA by itself, and HP correction for that. Those three in the average several formulas, and let it do its thing. In this particular case, I wouldn't do it for my car. That's too much for my car, but you get the general idea. So, what was I lost my train of thought. Oh, Bruce wanted to know about the little numbers to the right. I may have misunderstood your question. So, if you're talking about on the run entry here, these little numbers to the right of reaction time and right by delay box, that's your perfect delay box, if that's what you were asking. If I covered what you wanted on the logbook screen, great. But I may not have covered what that little number was to the right. I hope everybody's learned a few things about this. I know I've been skipping around a little bit. I have a tendency to do that. Now let me go over a couple other things on Crew Chief here. The search screen. for example, when I get to an event, I'll a lot of times use the search screen to search by track. So if I go to Las Vegas, I'll pull up search by track, go to Las Vegas. If I'm bracket racing, I'll pull up the last time I'm bracket racing there and then go to predict DC. And actually, that crew chief number one's really close here, but DA half barrel, half humidity, probably just sequence. Look at that. That would be really close to what the car's going to run right now, off of a Las Vegas run. It might go a little bit quicker now, because on 60 foot's going to be a bit better. But yeah, I would say a 50, 51 would be right where the car would run. This is from Las Vegas, so it's pretty accurate. Okay, Bruce, I did cover it. On blown alcohol, I will repeat that formula. Those of you running blown alcohol, I would drop the list down and go to average several formulas. I'd pick HP correction, the second from the bottom, and I would pick density altitude and maybe DA half barrel, half humidity. Those three, and then click done. So let me draw them for you. This HP correction right down here, DA half barrel, half humidity right there, and density altitude by itself. And begin it. And then once you do that, you can tinker with this all you want and click done. Sometimes that's a really good formula combination. This only affects the bottom two. Those of you on blown alcohol, let me show you another one. Erase our drawings. So I wouldn't use this because this is going to go half nuts based on what I've got going on. I've made some changes that I wouldn't normally change. And you can kind of tell when things get a little nutty to go back in a second. Let me just, I want to change something real quick here. I just wanted to see something. This formula is a little bit nutty. I changed the horsepower correction. Let's see if it's right. Again, I should know all this, but I'm tinkering. Correction, let's go DA half barrel, half humidity. Oh, this is 60 foot. Let's do just the barometer. Okay, so yeah, the barometer is a little bit cool. And again, these aren't factors you can use for this. But get back on blown alcohol, I would select this guy right here, like I have been showing you, and let's try something. There's two ways that blown alcohol guys run their motor. A little bit lean, then they are fairly consistent, but they can drop off the edge of the earth fairly rapidly. Or just slightly rich. If you're just slightly a little bit rich, then I would select barometer, and I would put barometer somewhere at 0.1. I go 0.1 here. Let me point to what I'm pointing, what I'm doing. Barometer's there. I'm going to go with two types of formulas that I've used over the years. A barometer, a density altitude, and there I'm going to select, because adjusted altitude is currently selected. And I'm going to select density, and then I'm either going to go vapor pressure or grain. Now density altitude, around 150 feet to 200 feet. I'm just going to round it to 200 for right now. And then vapor pressure, depending on your combination, anywhere from 0.065 to 0.16. It's going to be a big swing. I would start people at the higher number to see what happens. And you won't know until your pass is done. But when I do that, like the barometer reading goes half nuts because I went from 2780 to 30, which isn't going to ever happen. Oh, real. So I would pick barometer, density, altitude around 200, and then either grains or vapor pressure. If you're using grains around 15, probably is a good starting point. Vapor pressure is anywhere from 0.07 to 0.16. And then just save it. Let's see what it does. There are other ways that it's done. If you're, when you change that formula, is it for that session or is it permanent? Right? It is until you change it again. If you click on Crew Chief 1, we'll hold that formula for as long as you want us to hold it. So when you do it, you can tinker. I go to people's trailers all the time and I try it. The other thing that you might want to try is this new formula called Vapor HP Correction. And then I would probably put some barometer and grains in there, maybe not grains, because that's like barometer and vapor HP, and just start with like 0.009 or 0.001, just to start, and see what it does. Now, those of you that are racing in a couple, what is it, Houston or something, and then Gainesville in a few weeks. I'll be at Gainesville. I won't be at the Houston or Dallas, whatever those events are. But if you've got issues, let me know. But this Vapor HP Correction one, I've been using with great success. That one right there, and barometer when I need it. But even by itself, it's worked really well. And it has water content in it. So it seems to move pretty good. And I've tried it on several and they worked really well. And I've tried it on a couple that didn't work at all. So depending on how rich or lean your mixture is will affect that formula a great deal. What about custom rules? Great, I was just about to give to that. And this is what he's talking about is you click on Crew Chief 1. There's something called custom rules here. And it's fairly new. I've rewritten it recently. The custom rules is a very important thing because you have these things that will automatically take into effect. And I'm going to explain to you why they're there. I have checked the grains rule. When the grains goes over 100, I drop that factor down to 4.0. It's pretty aggressive. You can do the same thing for humidity, one or the other, but not both. The reason this was created was for Topeka, Kansas. One night we were racing and I was helping Top Sportsman car, if I remember correctly. And the thing literally fell off the face of the earth. It got to 116 grains and the thing could not run. It was like 700 slow. The DA actually went down about 200 feet, but the grains went from 86 to 120, and the car would not run. It wouldn't run. It was 700 slow. And I've been tinkering with this grains rule. So as soon as I clicked it and put 100, I think it was 105 per head, because I turned it on and it said it was going to be 700 slow, and he said, there's no way in the world it's going to do that. I said, I'm just experimenting. And then after that run, he goes, do that again. And I clicked it without him entering that run, and it was to the thou correct. But it was a naturally aspirated Top Sportsman car. And it fell off the face of the earth, that big motor, when it went over whatever the grains were. And my memory was it was 48 grains worth. I mean, it was like a haze. So if your car is affected by that, And those cars will hit a certain wall, whether it's relative humidity or grains of water. Mine at 85% relative humidity will start to drop off more than the DA or the humidity would normally factor. So one of these you can select, and I'll show you how it works here. None of these, the current weather isn't going to support this data, this run, but that will only take place when it hits that range. And it actually will take place a little before that too. It starts to roll itself in now with the new version earlier, but slower. And so that custom rule is either grains or humidity. Those of you, especially bracket racing at night, there will be a point where we call it the law of diminishing return. Car will not go any faster because the DA is dropping, but the water content is not allowing it to burn. So I write a version of crew chief for nitromethane cars, and that's basically what they do. They have their ignition time is controlled by a rule, and the rule is automatic in crew chief that as the grains goes up X numbers, their ignition time, their advanced ignition time, or their default ignition timing moves up with a certain number for every whatever number of grains. So, my software calculates says your ignition timing was 56.6, needs to go 57.3. And automatically moves their ignition timing up and down to burn more, start to burn earlier so they can't burn water. So the same thing applies here. So trial, experiment with it. That's why I didn't really cover it very carefully until now, but it has shown to work on a lot of cars, and other ones don't need it. But I've seen a lot of guys on alcohol that, the DA will drop 600 feet, and they aren't looking at DA at all, which is fine. But the grains of water hit a certain number, and they start to slow down pretty dramatically. So this last race that I was at, my predictions were really, really close. And the guy ran a couple rounds before when it got to about 85% relative humidity. His car on alcohol wouldn't run. It was all 400. And he was just telling me how consistent the car was. It ran the same ET all day long. Well, it didn't. So I showed him this rule thing. I said, well, at the time, I was going off his weather that didn't have grains. He was using a handheld. But I said, with the relative humidity went to 88%, so, if they kick that rule in, it would tell you you're going to be slow by 300, and that's about what you would. So it works on virtually every kind of car. It's just, how do you prove it? Well, you got to wait until you get to a point where it is that way. And it's easier to get, in the early months of the year, it's easier to get relative humidity higher than it is to get the grains really high. So you might find and test it at Gainesville if you're running at night, and the grains of water relative humidity hits a certain number. If your car doesn't want to run, that range. But that's the custom rule, and they will kick in just before that number and get more aggressive as it gets closer to that number, and then it's that number. It's really getting aggressive. But you have to do it sometimes. Some cars, it just requires it. I hope that covers that for you. But I use it, and it told me a number that at first I was like, why is it telling me a number so much slower than the other form? Well, that's because the number had kicked in. In this case, it's much lower, so the number didn't kick in. But you get the idea. It's very important. It only affects crew chief number 1. Those rules only affect here. Because these down here, they're still CAN numbers. They're what people tell us to do, but they can learn on their own to a certain extent, and they're normally fairly accurate as long as you use something that has water content in the chief formula. You should be okay. However, nothing wrong with tinkering, and that custom rule is in there for a reason. Because everything that goes into crew chief software is because I've lost a race because of it, or somebody else that I was close to or helping They lost a race, and we went through and poured over the data until we figured out, hey, something's wrong here. We need to fix. Again, let's cover wind real quick. When to use wind, because that was part of what I wanted to go over. I turn the wind on in the prediction sometime. And it's only if I know that the wind sensor on top of my trailer is pointing the right way. I'm going to say this again because I get calls from people saying the prediction's way wrong. You know, every time they turn the wind on, it's backwards. And I find out that their wind sensor, their weather station, is pointing the wrong way. There's a silver mark on your wind vane. Point it down the track towards the finish line, parallel to the track. And make sure that if it says that you've got a headwind, that you actually have a headwind. You've got to do those things. That's the other reasons with the new weather stations that have screw-in poles on the bottom. You have to drill a hole through that where it screws in and put a pin or something to stop it from unscrewing itself. High wind. So if you don't understand what I mean, give me an email and I'll show you. I use the new Perform Air Pro. And you don't want to over-tighten the pole into the base of that weather station. But you don't want to leave it so loose it will unscrew itself. So once you get it just snug, you drill a hole through it where it threads in, and you put one of these quick release little pins that have like a ball bearing at the end of it. You push it in, it'll hold it, and then if you have to take it off, you just pull the pin, and you can unscrew it from the pole. If you don't understand what I mean, give me a call or email me and I'll explain. That's what we found. A couple people almost lost their weather stations in high wind because they unscrewed it. So, what happens there is what I learned at the track. I try to explain to customers. Using wind is important. When you decide to turn it on, you better have very accurate weather going. I don't use wind at Indianapolis Raceway Park on the right lane if the wind's coming from the right lane. It's all covered by the stand. Completely irrelevant. I do from the left. Las Vegas, I use the wind if it's a headwind or a tailwind. If it's a left coming from the left side of the car, it's blocked by the stand. Doesn't do you much good. So how do you know? Well, I thought about that a long time, and then I watched Dan Fletcher go out about 1,100 feet every event with a little handheld wind sensor, and he points it around and tries to figure out if the wind is really hitting the track. He just drives right next to the track, then he parks for just a second, takes a little reading, and then he moves on. I thought that was ingenious. So if you're not sure if the wind is hitting the car, you have to basically turn the wind off. Now, Joliet, for example, when that was running, if it was a headwind before and now it's a tailwind, I always turn it because everybody's a tenth off. So when you turn the wind on, where it is right now, I have wind changes predictions. It looks at the wind speed differences in direction right there. They're both tailwinds. 3 mile an hour, it says it's going to be slowed down by 4,500. Right there. Okay? So if I turn it off, when it says no wind in predictions, that means no wind will affect the prediction regardless of what the current wind is. It doesn't matter to us. What behind the scenes, we're going to take the base run, wind speed and wind direction and put it in the current. You can't see it, but we do it just so there's no effect in wind. When you turn the wind on, there's an effect, so be careful. I've had people turn it on, not pay attention at all, and they're telling, oh, it's going to be 500 fact. Well, no, you got the wind sensor pointing the wrong way, and or you're behind the stands and you can't get an accurate wind reading at all. So be a little cognizant of that when you do that. Wind factors, again, are on that factors tab in the upper right. You need higher number. If it's not aggressive enough, like we have junior dragsters that need these at 0.006. What this means, a wind factor means, is times 10. A 10 mile an hour headwind would be worth 1.5 hundredths. 10 mile an hour tailwind, the same. That's all that factor means. Multiply it times 10, and you'll have your ET there. It's pretty simple, but then again, that's the right way to do it. Because wind is an ever-changing thing, and you leave that up to your discretion to decide whether you want it on or not. I will turn mine on from time to time and leave it up. but I'm very sensitive to the fact of where the stands are, how it's hitting the car, and what else is happening. Other thing I want to cover, those with multiple cars, there is a team license option available, which is kind of cool. Down here, when I'll turn it on and show you what it does. That's for multiple cars. So it'll automatically turn on and can handle up to 5 cars at once. There's Larry's car predicting, there's my car. So you can add, like here, if I exit out, I go to team users, hold on, I'm going to do this the right way. Team users, and I'm going to set down super quick. Modify this, make sure that's turned on. It is. Save, exit. When I go back to predict DT, turn the team on. Now I actually have 3. And I do. Don Higgins, Super Panel, Larry, Super Gas, and my Super Quick one. Okay? So that's how the team license works. It will predict up to 5 cars at once, and on your pager and or text messaging will come out. All 3 of them will come out, or up to 5, onto your pagers and or your phone if you have text messaging. I just want to show everybody how that works. I'll hold up here. Other thing I want to cover while there's still quite a few of you here, if you end up putting this in the wrong database, I've had people delete these runs. You don't need to do that. Simply drop this list down and pick the correct database. And then press enter and save it. That's all you got to do. So I put this in the wrong one. I should have had a 190 Havana. Press enter. I picked the right one. I press the enter key and save run. And it says my weight is different. Do that. Now each database is also can have its own picture. That's going to when you erase it. But you'll notice this picture in the middle of the screen, let me erase the drawing, is different than it was just a second ago. I'm going to switch back a run. And here's the 190 sea level picture. And here's the Havana 190. So you can have different pictures in the main entry screen, and that's for people with multiple cars especially. You can make sure that the right car is being entered into the run and entry screen by the picture that's in. Sorry, my cat was flying around the kitchen. All right, but that's a general idea of what it is. I hate to see people delete runs for any reason. You can fix anything wrong. Okay, I'll open it up to questions. If anybody's got any. Remember, there's notes, these files that are in there. You can download at your discretion, and I will have this file ready to download sometime tomorrow, the next day, that you can download if you missed it or if you want to go back and review stuff. And there's a survey. They tell me at the end if you want to fill it out, right? I hope I've covered some of the more common questions people have. I hope you've learned something new that you didn't know about Crew Chief before. If you did, great. That's what we're here for. But if you have any questions, go ahead, type them in, and I'll try to answer. I'll be here as long as you want. But for the rest of it, if you don't have any questions, you're more welcome to leave. But who will save the children? Wayne wants to know. I do have a book, by the way, if anybody didn't realize that. I have created a book. It's now out on Amazon, and it's on Barnes & Noble, a bunch of other places too. But I wrote a novel a long time ago, and it's called But Who Will Save the Children? And let me just see. Cover. And that's what it looks like. The front cover says, But Who Will Save the Children? It is a suspense novel. I saw them at the racetrack too, but you can get one at Amazon. They're almost always sold out. Bastards. I'm never ordering them. And I never really thought it would do what it's doing. So I've sold a lot of them, but again, it's just something I did for fun and I've always wanted to do. I'll have a bunch of these that short stories I've written, but this is a long novel and quite thrilling if you like that. All right, let me go back and answer the questions here. When going back and forth between a full dragster and junior, would it be best to have a team? It's not necessary. The only time a team is really required is if you're both running at the same time. So let me show you an example of how to switch between a big dragster and a junior. For example, I have, my dog can drink out of the water bowl. I have my car on the screen. Let me see, I'm going to pull up a junior. To do that, I'm going to use the search menu because it's simpler to pull up all of them. I'm going to go by search up here, and I'm going to search by database. Now, if you're at the same event, I'll show you how to do that too. And I'm going to search by database, second option down, and I'm going to go to JT's round. Here's, I press enter, and here's JT's junior dragster with a 790 set up for ballast. So it's a junior dragster, but it has ballast predictions built into it. And it's an 8-mile database as well, of course. It has no delay box because that's that database. So it tells them how much ballast, and now it says predict ballast. These run the 790 index back then, so we had to dial in 790. To do that, we had to predict ballast. That will be covered on the Junior Dragster webinar on Thursday. It'll be very similar to this one. Do I use data acquisition with runs like RacePack? Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I'm a RacePack dealer, so I've done this forever. Let me erase drawings to show you what I'm talking about. All right. I'm going to go last. Go up a run. So, data acquisition. There's two ways this works. Data acquisition menu is at the top of the screen. But before that, you got to go to your setup menu and make sure it's properly set up. So I'm going to start with where you need to begin. I go to normal. Dog wants to let him out. I go up to setup, and I go down to data acquisition setup. And what that does, it says it's RacePack. Where is it stored? Well, if it's not the right information, you use this little these question marks to find the right file. You need to know the data acquisition executable file. I want to do that phone right there. And then it says, okay, what folder are we using? Well, in this case, I'm going to use 2022. Let me change that real quick. I'm going to use 2021 because I haven't made any passes in 2022. RPK file, save. So I've done that. So now, pull this up. Now I can go to data acquisition. If I have not downloaded anything, it will ask me where it is. So I'm going to click on data acquisition. Just for giggles, I'll just go click one of these because I don't have it. So now that run is stored. Crew Chief has stored the file for RacePack in with Crew Chief. Well, what's that mean? The next time I want to see the RacePack file for this, I don't have to search for it. I just go back up to data acquisition and Crew Chief will pull it open for me. And that's handy to have when you're unsure of why a car did what it did. It's easy to pull it up. You don't have to figure out where it is if you do. Not a lot of people do this, but it is kind of nice. So you can do that. And then when you enter a run in Crew Chief software, it sends a file to RacePack for weather. All you have to do is to get that weather is you'll go to my cat. Sorry, you can tell he's upset with that setting. But in RacePack, you have a Get Weather button under weather. So I'm going to point to that where you go to your Weather tab right there, and then you click Get Weather. Once RacePack knows what file it's looking for, which is our pack data or something like that, is a file that we create for it, then it will transfer and bring all the weather over for each run that you want the weather stored in RacePack. You got to put the run in Crew Chief first. When you download RacePack, just like that's all it does is it links the two, make it a little simpler. That's it. But that's how raceback runs. And the next question was, what do you suggest for this one? What is the fuel selection on a car that uses pump gas? Honestly, I still use density altitude. It's the main component because pump gas is very sensitive usually. Smaller the air inlet, the more density altitude affects it, and humidity and barometer. I would use the DA half barrel, half humidity, or the DA with barrel and humidity as a default, and then work with that. My guess is a pump gas will be between 100 and 150 feet of DA, and it will take about 8 points of relative humidity and about 9.09 on the barometer. Would be a good start. I'd say 150 on DA, 0.0 or 8.0 on humidity, and 0.09 on barometer. That will get you going. Let's put it that way. Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Bill, if you want to email me, I'll cover that again for you. We covered it earlier. Joe, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. There was 251 of you that joined, and quite a few of you left. So if you have any other questions or anything you'd like me to cover, I'll hang around. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming by and sharing anything that you shared and questions that you have. But if you do have questions, just let me know and I'll hang around. Is there a way to get notifications from the maintenance log? There isn't. And the reason for that, thanks, Bruce, appreciate you coming by, is that I used to have that, and people would get notifications to do all sorts of things because they hadn't filled out the maintenance log. Where's the maintenance log, you ask? I didn't cover that because it really wasn't part of this, but that's this guy right here with a little icon that has a gear in it. For those of you that aren't aware, the crew chief does this. So to use it, you just click on it and and it will give you a list of things that you can keep track of. But if you didn't use it, I do things for my other cars, oil changes, trans fluid, all sorts of stuff. My Ford fuel filter, all that. I'm going to be adding mileage to that because I get fuel for my cars anyway. So, but I used to have them, but if you didn't fill it out, then all sorts of messages would pop up on people's screens and they didn't like it. So I took it out. So if you wanted to do that, you can go to the print list button, go to screen or print, and it will show you all of the things that are remaining and how many days are left right there on the screen. But I don't look to be putting it in there either, honestly. I had too many people that complained when I had it 10, 15 years ago. Just one of those things we've learned over time. Thanks, Wayne. I will see you in Gainesville because I'm already here. I'm about 15 miles south of the track. Count is dropping, so I'll hang around for a few more minutes if you got any other questions. And you can also email me if you'd rather. Again, I appreciate everybody coming by. I'm going to go ahead and end it. If you need to email me, go ahead.